Hi, Nicole. How are you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you. I think it is very timely.
Oh, yes. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we really jump into it, I want to let folks know we're going to be talking about how to cope with quarantine, lessons that we learned from the last quarantine, and maybe some of our expectations going forward. But if you want to skip straight to the good stuff, go to selfcaretips.org/free guide and download a free guide with information about how you can create your own self-care plan now and when we're in quarantine. So, yeah, so I've been watching the numbers in Montgomery County with like, clenched teeth and clenched hands, like, oh gosh, the COVID-19 numbers are going up, and I'm expecting a quarantine is likely to happen again soon. Not that we ever really truly got out of quarantine to begin with, right?
Yeah. It feels like we've just kind of gone to maybe like a lesser state of a quarantine, but it still hasn't gotten back to normal.
Right. Yeah, normal, whatever that is these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are we on? Month 9, I think.
Yeah. Lot longer than like what people were saying before. It seems like when we had quarantine the first time, it was like, oh, yeah, like in a couple months, like we would be good to go. And
Mhm.
here we are. It's still happening.
Yeah, my daughter is in second grade now. Of course, she was in first grade originally when we received the orders to shut down the school. And we were like, yeah, so it's a 2-week shutdown. It's going to feel a little different. And then, hopefully we'll get you back in school. She just now, last, whatever it was, Thursday, went back to school for the first time. And the very next day, so she went back on Thursday, and then on Friday, we got the notice shutting down again.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh,
So it's been a roller coaster, right?
yeah.
So how did you cope when you first got the news that we were all going into quarantine?
I mean, there was a sense of like anxiety for me. I see myself as more of an introvert, but I like to have contact with people. And since I wasn't living with any of my family at the time, I moved in with my partner, and I was like, well, when am I going to be able to see my family again? It was it was hard to kind of cope with initially.
Mhm.
Um, Also, I kind of had like the idea in my head of like, okay, like I don't have to like report to work because I physically can't get there. And my hours were kind of weird, so like my schedule kind of like fell off of to nothing. And it just didn't feel, it felt surreal, just like being in the apartment 24/7.
Yeah. I went through a lot of different emotions. Like I was upset and nervous, of course. There's been a few people that I've known who have gotten COVID. Everybody has survived, thank goodness. Um, and so like, nervous and anxious and scared because of that. Um, Also, when I face something that's really challenging, I tend to respond by like throwing myself into whatever it is that's in front of me. So I'm like, I'm gonna clean the house so well. I'm gonna write like 2,000 words a day in my book.
Yep.
And I did that for a little while, and then I was like, I need to chill out because this is gonna be a marathon, and I'm like sprinting through it right now. I need to stop. So I actually called my old therapist and was like, can we start talking again? Like, I think it would be good if I process some of this. I want to still be able to
Yeah.
be there for my clients. And in order to do that, I need to be like mentally well and stable. And so that was a really important change that I made back in March when all of this started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it was back in March, it seemed like it was going to be such a minuscule amount of time of like, okay, guys, we're shutting down for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see what happens. And then it's like, like a month later, and you're losing track of time, and life's not looking the way that it was, and you're losing some of those connections. And like for me, I, like thankfully, in my family, no one so far has gotten COVID, but I know with like my partner, his grandmother had COVID, and it was a really hard thing to like go through when you're not able to be with that person.
Right.
So it's very nerve wracking, and like and then you have the news on, and that's all that's playing, and you go online, and everything is about coronavirus. It really inundates you with such terrible news all the time.
Yeah. And that's really going to do a number on your mental health, no matter where your baseline was to begin with. And during this kind of, I mean, I'll call it a trauma, right? A collective trauma. It's going to have an impact on our mental health and wellness.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and
sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I was also thinking, like, when it came to a lot of this like virtual thing, right? Kind of like we're doing now, of like, all of our contact ended up being in this virtual world. You're not getting the same, human contact as you once did before quarantine happened, which also takes a toll on, your psyche as well.
And humans are social creatures, right? We need each other, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert or somewhere in between. Like, we need each other to be fulfilled and happy and ultimately to, live our best lives as humans, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So those of us who have, a puppy, pointed at Benji, we at least have a little bit of contact, but yeah, no, it's hard being away from the folks that are in our like inner circle for that long of a time. And so we were talking about what kind of advice would we give our viewers if we're going into like a really another intense like red alert level of quarantine again. And my advice is to stay connected with people in your social supports, no matter how hard it is, right? We get Zoom fatigue, we get phone fatigue, but those connections, even though they feel different from the way it was last year at this time, they're still incredibly important for our mental health.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest parts of being in quarantine is that lack of communication or being able to be with like your loved ones. And especially if we're having a quarantine during the holidays, I mean, for a lot of people, that's, prime family time, and being able to still have that connection is very important.
Yeah.
So for me, one of the biggest things, I kind of alluded to it earlier, it was like keeping a routine, right? So I kind of started getting into the slump of, okay, like I'm able to sleep in a little bit earlier. I don't have to go to bed as, when I used to. And, my day became blobs, especially if I didn't have anything planned. And to be quite honest, what is to be planned when you're stuck in the apartment? So I kind of started building my own day of, okay, I want to be up by at least this time. I will, I'll have breakfast, I'll have my coffee, I'll play out with Bam, outside. We'll go on a nice walk, come in, clean this or organize that, or, trying to find things that can fill the day, so that you're not sitting and watching the TV and like all the news that's happening the whole entire time, or kind of getting into those ruts of thinking about how difficult this time can really be. Because it's one thing to acknowledge that it's happening and being able to feel the feels, right? But it's a whole other ballgame when you're by yourself and starting to kind of fall into those patterns of it consuming everything that you're doing, especially since you can't go anywhere.
Right. And that's such a fine line, right? Because we have to let ourselves feel our feelings.
Yes.
This is a tough time. We're experiencing some unprecedented challenges and it stinks, right? It's hard. It's scary. It's nerve wracking. And we're allowed to have those feelings.
Yeah.
But what we don't want to do is fall into this rut of only being in those feelings and not working to create the positive self-talk and create the structure that's going to lift us out of the negative feelings at times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or help us manage them. I shouldn't say, I mean, right? Like we can manage and cope, but we don't want to pretend they're not there.
Yes, right. Because then, I mean, at that point, it kind of reminds me of like it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
Phrase, right? Of like, yes, we are all living in this pandemic together. It is a collective trauma. It's something that we're all going to, have etched into our brains for a very long time. And it is making our lives change in ways that we never thought that they had to.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, there has to, in order for your mental health to stay, as strong as it can, you want to have those normalcy moments. You want to be able to still enjoy things during the day,
Mm-hmm.
and not feel like everything is surrounded around the virus.
Right. Yeah. Let yourself have a healthy distraction at times.
Yeah.
Something about what you just said reminded me of this book I'm reading, and stop me if I shared this on our last video, because I've been repeating it a lot because I just loved it so much. So Oprah Winfrey's audio book, A Wisdom of Sundays. So it's like a compilation of different conversations she has had with like spiritual advisors on her show, Super Soul Sundays.
Cool.
She was talking about a conversation she had with Maya Angelou, where she called Maya Angelou and was crying and was really upset about something going on in her life. And Maya stopped her and said, "I want you to stop right now and thank God." And Oprah was like, "Oh, I'm crying. I'm upset. Like, why would I be thanking God right now?" And she was like, "Because there is a rainbow in every storm. And just because you haven't seen that rainbow yet doesn't mean you should forget about it. So go ahead and thank God that there is a rainbow in this storm somewhere."
Absolutely. I love that.
Right? So good.
It's so apropos, like, for the situation. Like, I think of the one quote, if you didn't have night, we wouldn't see the stars, or if we didn't have darkness, we wouldn't see the stars. Like, we wouldn't have that appreciation. And it's hard to think of now because we're still in it. And, we've had some glimpses of, the life beyond coronavirus, but with kind of how things are looking now, it's even harder to really see what those stars could be. But they're there.
Yeah. So I want to invite our viewers to comment. What kind of things did you do to get yourself through quarantine, this summer? And also, how do you plan to handle quarantine during the holidays? But thank you, Nicole. Your advice is well-timed and much appreciated. I want to remind people, if you want to get like a jump start on figuring out how to do self-care, go to selfcaretips.org/free guide and check out our trusty guide inspired by Benji.
Oh, yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.